In the small town of Hallowbrook, deep in the woods, there stood an ancient mansion, long abandoned and cloaked in legends of terror. No one dared to approach it after nightfall, for the house had a reputation. They said it was alive, breathing, watching, and waiting. One stormy evening, a group of college students decided to prove the stories wrong. They'd heard whispers of the Grey Lady, a ghostly figure said to haunt the halls, trapped between life and death after she was betrayed by her husband a century ago. He had murdered her in that very house, burying her beneath the floorboards in a fit of rage, her body never found. As they entered the mansion, the air thickened, carrying the scent of decay. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the old wooden floor creaked beneath their weight. With flashlights in hand, they explored, the beams of light cutting through the darkness. Each corner they turned seemed to pulse with a presence unseen, and shadows danced just beyond their reach. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. A cold breeze would brush past their necks, even though all windows were sealed shut. They could hear faint whispers, unintelligible but persistent, like a voice trapped just beyond the veil of reality. Then, one of them saw her, the Grey Lady. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her gray, tattered dress flowing unnaturally as if caught in a wine that didn't exist. Her face, hollow and pale, stared down at them with eyes as black as the void. Her lips moved, but no words escaped. Terrified, the students tried to leave, but the door they had come through was now sealed shut. Panicking, they ran through the halls, but the house seemed to shift, twisting the paths they had just walked. Rooms appeared where none had been before, and the mansion seemed endless, as if it stretched into a realm beyond time. Then, one by one, they began to disappear. First, Jenny, who was pulled into a shadowy corner by an unseen force, her screams fading into the silence. Next, it was Mark, who swore he heard his name whispered from behind a locked door. He opened it, stepping into the darkness only to vanish without a trace. The last two, Sarah and David, found themselves cornered in the mansion's grand library. It was there, in the flickering light of their dying flashlight, that they saw the truth. The books on the shelves were filled with names, hundreds of them, each name crossed out in red ink. In the center of the room stood a portrait of the Grey Lady in her former life, standing beside her husband. But in the painting, her eyes had been scratched out, leaving only black, empty void staring back at them. Suddenly, Sarah gasped, her name written in fresh red ink in one of the books. Before they could react, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Slowly, they turned to see the Grey Lady standing there, closer than before, her lips finally parting to speak. "You were never meant to leave." The last thing Sarah and David saw was the room dissolving into a swirling fog, the walls closing in as the Grey Lady reached for them. The next morning, the mansion was as quiet as ever, the storm having passed. But if you listened closely, standing near the broken windows, you could hear faint whispers on the wind, names scratched out, waiting for more to be added. The Grey Lady still waits, and the mansion still grows, trapping all who enter. But there is a new rumor now, a fresh whisper among the townsfolk. Some say, late at night, you can see figures in the windows of the mansion, young, frightened, pleading for escape. Yet, no one has ever succeeded. The mansion demands more, and it always gets what it wants. The mystery of Hallowbrook Mansion continues, the names in the books still waiting to be crossed out. Weeks had passed since Sarah, David, Mark, and Jenny vanished inside Hallowbrook Mansion. The town fell into an eerie silence, as though the land itself mourned the loss of the 4 students. Despite the local authorities conducting a fruitless investigation, no trace of them was ever found. The mansion remained untouched, casting its ominous shadow over Hallowbrook, daring anyone else to step inside. One night, just as autumn set in, a stranger arrived in town. He was tall, gaunt, with strikingly pale skin and eyes that seemed too familiar with darkness. He introduced himself as Thomas Ashford, a historian specializing in paranormal phenomena. Though most dismissed him as another thrill-seeker, his intensity was undeniable. He claimed to know about the mansion and the Grey Lady more than anyone had before. The names, he whispered to the bartender at the local pub one night, his voice low and conspiratorial. They aren't just victims. The books in the library, they're more than records. They're invitations. Once your name appears, the house begins to claim you, piece by piece. The bartender, wide-eyed, leaned in. How do you know that? Thomas smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Because my family has been tied to that house for generations. Whispers spread quickly through town. Some believed he was the descendant of the mansion's original owners, while others thought he was just as cursed as the souls trapped inside. But one thing was certain. Thomas Ashford wasn't in Hallowbrook by accident. He had come with a purpose. A week after his arrival, Thomas stood before the mansion. With only the moon to guide him, he stepped inside. A cold wind rushing past him, as if the house itself recognized his presence. He made his way through the darkened halls with the ease of someone who knew them well. His flashlight flickered across the faded wallpaper, the decaying furniture, and the unsettling portraits that seemed to follow his every move. Finally, he reached the grand library. The air was thick with tension, as though the walls were holding their breath. Thomas approached the shelves, running his fingers across the spines of the dusty books. The familiar red ink still marked the pages, but he wasn't looking for any of the names scratched out long ago. He was looking for something else, something hidden, and then he found it. At the back of one of the shelves, he uncovered a journal bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. The name etched into the cover read, Eleanor Ashford. His heart raced as he opened it, the scent of old paper filling his lungs. Inside, he found her story, his ancestors' story. Eleanor, the Grey Lady, had been a powerful medium, one who could communicate with spirits from beyond. But her gift had become a curse when she tried to use it to bring back someone she had loved and lost. Her husband, consumed by jealousy and fear of what she had done, had murdered her, sealing her spirit within the mansion's walls. But there was more. Buried deep within the journal were instructions, rituals Eleanor had written to bind herself to the house, to keep the spirits she summoned from escaping. She had not only trapped herself, but all who entered after her. As Thomas read, a dark realization dawned on him. The house wasn't just haunted, it was a prison for lost souls, and Eleanor had been its warden for over a century. But now, it was beginning to unravel. The mansion hungered, and it was reaching out beyond its walls, claiming more and more victims. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. A figure appeared in the doorway, the Grey Lady, her pale form hovering in the mist. But this time, her expression was different, less menacing, more sorrowful. You came back. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thomas clenched the journal in his hands. I had to. This has gone on long enough. Eleanor's eyes darkened. You think you can stop it? The house, it's stronger than me now. It's stronger than any of us. It won't let you leave. A sharp creak echoed through the mansion, and the walls seemed to tremble. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath his feet as if the house were alive, awakening to their presence. I don't need to leave, Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the growing unease. I came to finish what you started. With a quick motion, he tore several pages from the journal, revealing a ritual Eleanor had left incomplete. It was an ancient rite, one that could break the house's hold on the souls trapped within, but only if performed at great personal cost. The Grey Lady's form wavered, her expression a mix of fear and hope. If you fail, you'll be trapped here forever. Thomas met her gaze, resolute. Better to try and end this curse than to let it continue. As he began to prepare for the ritual, the walls of the mansion creaked, the spirits within stirring violently. Shadows flickered across the room, voices rose in a ghostly chorus, and the mansion seemed to close in on him. But just as Thomas was about to utter the final words of the incantation, a figure stepped out of the shadows, someone he never expected to see. It was David, one of the missing students. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale, but he wasn't dead. Not yet. Stop, David rasped, his voice broken. It's too late. You don't know what you're dealing with. The air thickened as Thomas hesitated. The house trembled with anticipation. Was David a warning? Or was he just another pawn of the mansion, trying to lure Thomas into failure? The ritual was unfinished, the Grey Lady waiting, and the mansion's dark power growing. And now, with David's sudden appearance, Thomas faced an impossible choice. The house wasn't just haunted, it was evolving. The question lingered. Could Thomas break the curse, or would the mansion claim him next? The answer remained shrouded in darkness as the mansion watched and waited, its hunger insatiable. Thomas stood frozen, his mind racing as David's hollow figure stumbled closer. The mansion groaned around him, its walls warping as though eager to swallow them whole. David's eyes, empty and devoid of life, bore into him, carrying a warning that chilled Thomas to his core. "You can't save us," David muttered, his voice a faint echo. "It's already taken us. We belong to it now." The journal trembled in Thomas's hand, the ancient words blurring before his eyes. The gray lady hovered nearby, her form flickering between sadness and despair. He could feel the mansion's malevolent presence closing in, tightening its grip with every passing second. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the house itself was drawing a deep, slow breath. But Thomas, determined to break the curse, refused to give in. He began chanting the final words of the ritual, his voice steady despite the terror crawling up his spine. The room darkened, shadows stretching long across the floor, as though the house was bending reality itself to stop him. Suddenly, a deafening crash reverberated through the mansion. The ground beneath Thomas shifted violently, knocking him to his knees. David's face twisted into a grotesque grin, his hollow eyes gleaming. "You think you're different, but you're just another name," David hissed. "Just another sacrifice." Thomas struggled to his feet, but it was too late. The air around him pulsed thick with the weight of unseen forces. The words of the ritual faltered on his lips as the mansion itself fought back, tendrils of darkness snaking from the walls, coiling around him. The gray lady screamed, her voice a wail of agony, as she was dragged backward into the mist. Her form dissolved, leaving only a faint whisper. "I'm sorry." Thomas reached out, but his hand passed through the air where she had been. The tendrils tightened, pulling him toward the center of the room, where a deep, unnatural void had begun to open. The house wasn't letting him perform the ritual, it was feeding on him, consuming his will, his soul. Desperate, Thomas ripped the journal apart, scattering the pages across the floor. The void swirled faster, pulling them into its maw. He fought against the pull with everything he had, but the house was stronger, far stronger than he had imagined. Suddenly, he felt something cold around his throat, an invisible force, tightening, suffocating. The whispers grew louder, more distinct now. They were names, hundreds of names, all the souls the house had claimed over the centuries. And soon, his name would be added to the list. He gasped, his breath escaping in short, panicked bursts as the darkness closed in around him. His vision blurred, the world spinning. The last thing he saw was David, standing calmly at the edge of the void, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "You were never meant to leave," David whispered, the echo of his voice fading as the darkness consumed everything. Thomas's screams were swallowed by the mansion as his body was pulled into the abyss. The last flicker of light from his flashlight sputtered out, leaving the house in silence once more. The next morning, Hallowbrook was peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But those who passed by the mansion swore they could hear faint whispers carried on the wine names, still being scratched out one by one. And deep within the mansion, on the shelves of the grand library, a new book appeared. Its pages were blank, except for a single name written in fresh, red ink. Asterisk, asterisk, Thomas Ashford. Asterisk, asterisk, the house had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before. And it was still waiting, watching, hungry for more. The curse would never end. It would only continue, forever feeding, drawing in the next unfortunate soul who dared to step inside.